This is Season 1, Episode 2 of Mastering the RPG, a tabletop RPG podcast all about upping your game. The episode tonight is Dwarves Are Not Actually Scottish, or Role-Playing 101. Welcome to Mastering the RPG. As I said, a tabletop RPG podcast focusing on maximizing your game. Whether you're a game master, a player, it doesn't matter. We want to give you advice, ideas, cool stuff we found, and some pretty strong opinions, but we hope you get something out of it. I'm Carl. I'm here with my co-hosts Eric and James, and you can find information about us at masteringtherpg.com. That is all one word. And please send us email, questions, hey, looking for advice, whatever, at gamemaster@masteringtherpg.com. Game Master is one word. Mastering the RPG is one word. So, hey, let's get right into it. I'm going to throw this on over to Eric, I think, to take us through the episode.
Yeah, cool. Well, hi, everybody. Starting today for our mini topic, we have a cool find.
Cool find.
To catch your, cool find.
Cool find.
Today, this is from me. We have a really cool document that I kickstarted. It was very successful. It's called the Herbalist Primer by Exalted Funeral. The PDF is out now, but depending on when you hear this, the hardcover might be out. It's truly amazing. It's one of the most ambitious things I've ever seen. It's like over 350 pages, and it's straight like an encyclopedia, like an old school encyclopedia, full of art. It's a role-playing agnostic kind of, primer on plants and herbs, herbalism, herbal magic. There's just a ton of stuff in here. It's almost overwhelming. But some of the kind of like little bits that I really like is they, first kind of talk about herbology and science, like real life herbology, real life science, about plants. There's like little illustrations about everything, so you can learn this. And so this book is really there for if you want to go deep into this, whether you're writing a game, whether you're writing a certain character who's into this, whether you're a player who wants to play kind of a druidic or herbalist type character. There's a lot of benefits here. So pretty much anything natural. There's so much stuff here for players and GMs alike. It kind of breaks down what botany and herbal magic might be. Then there's a whole section on actual plants, and the author takes a lot of liberties in actual science. Also kind of mythology and kind of just like geekdom itself. It's a big mix of all those things. Every single little plant section in the plant guide has let's take cedar, right? So cedar has its own little section. It has pictures of the bark of cedar, the kind of flowers, the leaves. It has a really cool thing where I really love, I thought it was hilarious, where a lot of those old encyclopedias with animals that have the little human silhouette and then the size of the animal.
Yeah.
This will have a human, which is a witch, and then it has a little silhouette of the plant, which I thought was really cool and funny. There's a full section of all the plants to give you ideas, magical and culinary and herbology. It then talks about recipes for food, for toxin, antidotes, possible potions, what those combinations could be. It has tools for making your own plants, making your own kind of things like that. And then more practically, it has some tables for plant generation. It has some really cool adventuring seeds, like really unique adventuring seeds that you can just kind of grab and go. And a ton of references. So yeah, I've given it to you guys. I mean, I just think there's so much here. Like, we're not really in reviewing here, but I definitely think if you're a game master or a player and you kind of find yourself needing some inspiration or getting to the gritty nitty of kind of, plants, I think this could be very beneficial. I've already had some ideas from this for something that I'm writing separately. So yeah, really cool. I don't know. What did your James? You looked at it, right? Any first impressions for you? Or
It's so beautiful. It's such a pretty book. It's, if you're at all familiar with those old zoological or botanical pictures, that beautiful, the artwork itself is just stunning. I'm blown away by it. I've only opened it up just now, but I can't wait to see a bit more of it. I must admit, I've seen a bit of an increase lately. Maybe it's because of, I don't know, maybe it's a World of Warcraft thing. You know how in World of Warcraft you used to go and pick herbs everywhere and mine ores and all that kind of stuff? Right? Yeah. So, that whole farming, gathering, crafting kind of aspect to role-playing games is something that's really started to improve. I must admit, I've got Rime of the Frostmaiden game right now, where I've got a cleric who's actually a bit shamanistic, that is constantly onto me about, I want to search for some herbs for my alchemy. I've got a similar with my Strixhaven game. I've got a couple of Witherbloom characters that are all about alchemy and all about herbalism. This stuff's great, just really good. Just to kind of, here's the climb that you would find it in. Here's the rarity that you would find it in. Here's some of the ideas around it, and let the player just run with it. Beautiful book. Looks really, really good. It reminds me a little bit about, there's another guy, and it's Broderick's Compendium of Plants and Fungi Across the Realms. Not at all as pretty as this, but in terms of kind of listing plants and getting a sense of fantasy stuff. I think this one's more sorry. I think this one's more, I'll just plant that seed. This one's a bit more rooted in kind of real botanical stuff, whereas Broderick's Compendium is not. It's very high fantasy. But I think both are great resources for games masters that just like, I want to look for herbs. Okay, well, this is some of the things you might find, and a storyline that might come out of that. Great stuff. Really good resource, Eric.
Yeah, this is probably the most. I've seen some of the other ones too, and I've seen some other supplements. This is probably the most in depth kind of generic supplement I've ever seen. I mean, they go so deep into even astrological correspondences or language that might come from certain flowers or what that means. So it's and I just think as a gift for somebody who's a game loving person, it's a great game. It's a great just showpiece kind of for your collection. And again, we're not here to sell the product. I was just so impressed by it, and that I think it's a really cool resource for anybody who wants to explore that realm. Carl, what about you? Do you any of this
I thought it was
it
was gorgeous. I mean, it really is. But not having a chance to read through it and say, the writing looks pretty good from what I looked at. It looks like they did a really well-researched job. It'd be definitely interesting to see how to pull hundreds of pages into your game and make it. I almost feel like there's going to be this so much you're going to be overwhelmed. But I haven't had a chance to read through it. So, Eric, you're gonna tell us all the good sections that we have to absolutely read to.
Well, like I said, I mean, just for if you want, that's a good point because there's a lot here. But if you want, there is some really cool, helpful tables and adventuring seeds and kind of quest ideas. So there is certainly the appendices have more like just easy pick up and go sections that if you don't want to go so in depth. But yeah, it really is for somebody who wants to get more in depth, either just for the GM to share with players, or for you for making your own game, or if you're in any type of natural, even it's not even somebody who's like a character who's based on herbalism. I mean, just getting, the forests and rainforests are so diverse, right? Those are the most genetic diverse places in the earth. So I think we get kind of lazy with tropes in kind of forests and what you might encounter. So I think this is also really good to kind of bring some natural things that you might not have thought of before, or some things that players could maybe encounter, or maybe they get poisoned by a certain type of flower, and they have to overcome that. So I think there's a lot of things here just for even that, right? Just making some adventures or just getting some quick ideas.
Well, I know. I mean, we have a million monster manuals in the world, right? To add flavor for creatures. This looks like it gives you that, I wouldn't say monster manual, but it gives you that sort of the natural world equivalent that you can play off of now as people are moving through the environment. It's not just it's a forest. I'm walking through. Okay, big deal. And now I run into a monster, and that was the whole purpose. It has its own life, blood to it. That looks pretty cool. But again, I haven't read it, but it just looks good just to start with. So
not a review, but if this seems like it might be something, I definitely highly recommend you check it out. It's a beautiful book, like you've all said. It's Herbalist Primer by Exalted Funeral. Yeah, James?
And now I know what Myrrh looks like, which is has been a lifelong question for me. What the hell is a frankincense Myrrh? Well, now I know what Myrrh looks like. So thanks for
weird.
that.
Yeah, it's a pretty weird plant.
But what does Murray look like? He's a bartender down the street. Anyway, all right.
The Scottish dwarven Murray, the
That's
bartender.
Right. Wow, what a great segue.
Great segue.
Mastering the RPG with Carl, Eric, and James. Yeah.
All right, and we're back. And our main topic tonight is what we said, Dwarves Not Actually Scottish, or Role-Playing 101. Now, I think the first thing that we should really talk about is, let's really define what we're talking about here, because, these are tabletop RPGs. These are tabletop role-playing games. But I think a lot of these games, especially the more mechanical ones, there's a lot of people who aren't necessarily role-playing, right? Or don't role-play that much. And so when we talk about role-playing, I think, at least what we're talking about, and I'll throw it to you guys too, is I think we're talking a lot about, truly kind of acting out this character, a character that you have, and the way that they interact with the other characters and with the GM. Truly making a character that has depth, backstory, and that when you're playing off people and improving, you're doing it. You're not just playing the fifth fighter that is always the same, right? You're truly playing a different character and bringing something new to the table. So that's what I think. James and Carl. Carl, we'll start with you, Carl. Right? Is this kind of where we're at, or?
Yeah, I think what we're talking about is when you say role playing, it's getting in this player character's head and backstory, everything about them, and then becoming them.
Yeah.
In character, interacting, that sort of thing. Versus, I think, like you mentioned, a lot of role playing games, it's like, I do a thing, I'm going to do another thing. Let me do a thing. But that's not what we want to try to get to. We want to talk about embracing a character and who they are and how they act and how they interact with others as that character that you're kind of possessing.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is about building story, isn't it? It's about getting fully fledged, beautifully crafted, well, not necessarily beautifully crafted, but deep enough characters that can drive a story, that can drive a narrative together, as opposed to, I guess, a more strategic tabletop board game where you kind of move a figure around and go, I roll the dice and I kill the orc. Well, no, this is about character motivation, what drives them, and then ultimately speaking Scottish as a dwarf, ultimately, as you progress.
Or not. And I think one thing we want to say up front is that, I believe, and you don't have to be, you're not have to be Matt Mercer, right? I think everybody can role play. Everybody can up the role play. Every single person can role play. There's really no doubt in my mind that anybody can do it. Well, and you don't have to be so over the top. I think just doing it a little bit can help a lot.
Well, remember we all role played when we were kids. You just have to find that inner child and bring them forward.
Very good point. So let's start with our main discussion here. Is kind of why should you role play? What are the benefits to somebody? And again, if you're somebody who role plays a lot, this might not appeal to you. But if you know somebody, or if you yourself doesn't role play as much, what do we think the main kind of benefits of role playing? What does it do for your game and for the game itself? And let's talk about GMs first, and we'll start with James here. Well, what do you think for GMs? And obviously GMs will role play, but some, might just kind of go through the motions more. What do you think kind of bringing more character diversity and depth to an improv to a game brings?
Yeah, I want to make a bit of a caveat here. Role playing can be really confronting too. It can be really scary. So in a lot of ways, it can be daunting for new GMs, and it can be daunting to try and encourage people to role play with you in your game. So I do need to put that out there first. So a lot of the tips of what we're going to, this is about kind of growing yourself as a role player as you go, either as a player or as a dungeon master, because it's not automatically easy, and it sometimes feels a bit natural, and you sometimes feel a little bit exposed, and you sometimes feel a bit silly. And in fact, you probably should feel a bit silly, because it's a silly thing that we're doing, but it's really, really good fun. Now, for me as a storyteller and for me as a games master, why you role play is really because it is the absolute meat in the sandwich in a lot of ways. The rules and the systems and the how many +2 you get on your dice roll and bits and pieces is a mechanism in order to tell the story, but the story in a lot of ways is how we interact with the other players across the table or across the virtual table. How you engage with someone in a one-on-one, personable kind of way. And in the majority of times, you do that through either your descriptions of a place, but more importantly, through the interactions with other people. And those other people could be either a bartender, a non-player character, or it could be a monster, kind of another thing. But ultimately, a lot of the game is between a dungeon master and a player, or a dungeon master and multiple players, or players and players. And that's really, it adds that extra level of really the game. I mean, it is a role-playing game. It's why we do it. And by upping your game in role-playing game and engaging with role-playing, you'll find that the game itself takes on a whole other level of complexity, of vibrancy, of depth, which is really lovely. It gives it a texture which makes it very different from computer games, very different from board games, and really sets it apart. Being able to play a villain that your players despise makes for an epic story. To be able to play a bumbling fool that the players pity, then propels your story to allow the story to go in directions that you would like it to go. So as a games master, upping your role-playing game does so much for the players, and grabbing them and dragging them into the world. A little bit of role-play adds a whole other dimension to the world that you're creating.
And I think it goes to that kind of writing concept, even though it's not specifically the show don't tell. So when you're role-playing, they're encountering the world as they would if they were there, as opposed to I'm telling you something. No, descriptions are great, but I'm telling you something versus you feeling that visceral, that as a role-playing, like you said, the bumbling fool, you don't have to say, oh, this guy's a bumbling fool. They're getting that. They're feeling it, as this person. And that makes it so much more richer when maybe that bumbling fool, it was all an act, and he comes back. But if you tell them, oh, it's a bumbling fool, you've defined something. They didn't get to make that assessment themselves. So I think that's part of it there. And it goes right along with what you're saying. It's a richer experience because I'm experienced it. I'm not being told what I experienced.
Yeah, for sure. I think, and this is going to lead into us talking about players, but I also a big part of it is just you're going to get your players more engaged, like you said. I mean, when people are shown, like you said, and they figure things out for themselves, or they believe they figured something out for themselves, right? They're just going to be more invested, and that's going to make you as a game master who built this rich world. And there's always that funny thing of game masters, writing too much and making lore. And that person they'll just either kill that person instantly or just won't even talk to them, and then they find the random person that they want to know more about, right? That's often because they feel engaged to that person more, or they didn't feel engaged to this villain. So I think that's a really good way to get your characters hooked into what you want them to be hooked into, is by kind of giving them a more compelling role-playing experience. So they will kind of follow along the path.
Yeah. So why is random farmers so compelling to players? Anyway, I don't know, but
because
random farmers, I don't know.
And I think that's what we're talking about. Is it's really funny is that, as a game master, you might have written something for it, and you have this random farmer that they're attracted to, and it's because they have some mannerism that you just maybe gave off the fly that you didn't even realize, and that instantly hooked their attention, and they were like, "What is that?" And that's the kind of thing that when you're developing your role playing, you can develop those kind of things that will get them hooked. That's not just like, oh, I just shown you that this is the big villain, right? Because I've described it to you, but then the way you've act them out and the way they interact, that will get them hooked in. So I think as a game master, it's a really good way to get your players to kind of follow along. Very cool. And I think let's talk now about players, which I think this is the more beneficial, well, not more beneficial, but this is, game masters are naturally going to be role-playing more, I think, because they have to play all these different roles, right?
Yes.
But from a player side, and a little bit of the goals, right? We know what the goals are for GM, but for the goals for a player, I think, your goal as a player, to me, what I see is character development. That's something that the GMs don't really get to do, right, as much. Players really get to explore character development. And for someone who doesn't like role-playing, I think I'll just start out here, just because I play more. A big thing, if you're like, people, or you are somebody who just likes combat, I mean, just right away, role-playing at your character, having your character be more invested in the world, interacting with those things, makes combat so much better. I mean, random combat after random combat can be fun, but like that combat where you're fighting against somebody that you've, had words with, or that have interacted with your backstory, and that you've had, these times where you've really role-played with the GM, that gives it so much more weight. That makes that combat so much more heavy, and the consequences of it, because you've kind of not exposed yourself emotionally, but because you've made yourself more vulnerable, I guess, like we talked about with role-playing, it makes combat more fun. So I think even if you don't see the value in it that way, it really will, at least from my experience, give more fun to combat. And also, just when you start playing a lot of different games, and I'll throw it to you guys too, but these tricks that when we talk about also role-playing, we're talking about the little kind of tips and tricks you can do to make a character feel distinct. And even when you play the same class again and again, where you might be bored by it, you can play these characters because of the way you role-play them. They can feel so completely different, right? So I think it's a really good way to keep it interesting for you as a player.
And that was necessary.
Carl,
and that was necessary in the early days of gaming, right? When you didn't have
there's like
feats and tons of skills, and where your character, and I think, a fighter was different from another fighter because of the way you role played it, the way this person, a swashbuckler, technically looked exactly the same as some other guy because of the way the rules are, but they were completely different and interesting because of the way you would role play it.
And don't forget also, what we're talking about here is not necessarily just the acting part of role-playing, but it's about the creation of a character with depth. So it's about having strong motivations for your character as well. So in some ways, being able to create a more broad, deeper character then allows you to have different reactions to events that might happen in the game than you might not normally have.
Yes.
It allows you to respond to events and to respond to characters and to respond to situations in a vastly different way than you as a player might do, or you as a smart character might do. It's about opening yourselves and being a little bit more, being a bit more exposed to risk as well. And that's really where some of the joy of playing these games are, where you get to take on a persona, and I'm not talking about the full-fledged acting persona, but putting yourselves in the shoes of someone drastically different. It adds such a benefit to the way that you play.
Yeah, very, very cool. And I think that's leading right into the how a little bit. And here's where we want to give you, unless you guys have any more things to talk about, kind of the why, or...
No, let's get into some meat and potatoes, right?
The nuts and bolts. Yeah.
How do we do this?
The kale and quinoa, if you're in California. Just kidding. It's avocado and toast.
And if you're wondering what kale or quinoa is, check out a herbalism guide.
No problem. Nice tie-in. Oh my god. All right. Cool. Yeah. So let's get into the nut and bolts now. Let's get into the how, and this is where we kind of, from our different experiences, and as GMs and players, and different things in our lives, right? Little tips and tricks that you can do, just to make it easier, to get more into those roles, to make things different. And I think maybe we all have our own list. I think we're gonna do a fun thing where maybe one of us will bring one up, and then we'll talk about it and see if it's on each other's list. So just starting out, I'll throw something in, and this is for players and GMs, but it's a little different when you're a player GM, but, having just a flaw, just at least one flaw, and having a quirk or a dream, just even one, can really, really make a difference. For a GM, I think just saying like really quick, there's a random NPC, even if you have a table or you can just randomly think of one, what's this character's dream? Or what's the character's, like, what's their flaw? And it doesn't be very simple. It could just be addiction. It could be wealth. It could be that simple. And even that, and this is something that I did learn when I did voice acting school, this is what they tell you. When you're doing character like this, just having something like that to kind of give depth and give a grounding, and it will just naturally come out of you more. So I think, and me and Carl play Savage Worlds, and Savage Worlds, it's part of the system to have flaws and to play them out, and they encourage that. But a lot of games don't do that. And I think we tend to kind of be, we're the heroes, so we think ourselves not as flawed. And this is not even necessarily comedic, but it's just having a flaw and having a dream is really beneficial. And with players, you can, some of this it can develop over time, but starting out with just at least one, if you're feeling overwhelmed, just write down one word, right? And then it can develop over time when you're a player, because you are progressing that character. So we'll throw it to James. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I'm just going to add to that. Yeah, I mean, the flaws are really important, but the dream, I think, is equally important. And that goes for any... there's that trope of I'm an actor. What's my motivation? But ultimately,
it's true.
Motivation is a really important thing for any scene, for any character. If you've got a great sense of what the dream is, what your player character is, what your character wants to achieve, broadly, like what are you trying to get out of your life? What do you want to get out of the adventure? But then, how that might determine the scene that you're in makes for a very different experience. So try and put yourselves in the shoes of your character, where you go, why am I here and what am I doing? And the same goes for if you're a dungeon master or a games master, where you're taking a non-player character. What is it that non-player character wants to get out of the scene that you're in? What are they trying to get? And make it a little unusual. The bartender doesn't just have to want to get money to be in a bartender. He wants to get money quickly because he's shutting everything down and run and moving to further his greater dream as an Arctic explorer. Just whatever, just coming up with some extra motivation that adds an extra level of complexity to the experience and to the scene.
And I
Dreams
think,
are cool.
And I think that's those are very good pickups, and having that quirk or a minor flaw or a mannerism, something that when we talk about a new role player, somebody who maybe is not as comfortable, it's a lot easier to kind of hang yourself on, give a hook that you can hang your hat on to start with, and then build from there. So that mannerism or a quirk or thinking about some kind of interesting trait. One of the things I like kind of to flip around, because lots of times we talk about goals and dreams, sometimes just think, how would your character react to the environment? You're in this environment with a bar and it's busy and there's things going on. It's not necessarily I have a dream to XYZ. It's like, how would I react to these things going on? It's noisy. It's, my character is, he's got this quirk where he's a little this and that, and how am I going to react to that environment that I'm in? And that gives you a chance to kind of keep it, in my opinion, sort of short term. You're looking across the room as opposed to thinking all the things that I have to worry about my character because of backstory and how I think and my dreams and I've got this super flaw that I got to worry about. No, just look at what's in front of you, and this is for people who are just trying to get their hands around it. I mean, folks like yourself, Eric, where you probably meld in one understanding continuously. But for some folks who are really starting out, find a couple of things that you can just kind of, hang your hat on and go forward with. At least my opinion.
No, for sure. And that's what I'm like. I think things can be simple. And when you're a player, it can develop. And these don't always have to be big dreams. Like, I think about a character, like just off the top of my head, for a one-shot. And James, I think my character was when you were running that one-shot. I made a fighter character. I made an orc fighter, right? Pretty generic. Yeah. And one of his goals was while he was really, really good at fighting and a mercenary, one of the things I just had for him is he loved wood carving. That was his goal, was making little wood carvings. And I thought that, the character I thought was was a pretty cool character. It was really interesting, and I think a lot of funny things came out from that character because of that. And it really added more depth to this thing that it wasn't just another orc fighter, right? He had this other kind of side to him that was artistic. Maybe he wasn't so good at it, but it was his dream. And so it doesn't always have to be so serious. And just having something kind of simple like that can really, really make a character feel totally different. Very cool. Let's move on to Carl. Do you have any? What another tip and trick you can think of?
Well, this is kind of I don't know if I'd call it. It's kind of like an anti-trick. I just wanted to pile on a little bit when you talked about your orc fighter who's also a craftsman. Be careful not to make, when you're role-playing, just a caricature of something, right? The classic, I'll use the term lawful stupid paladin, right? They're one-dimensional. They get kind of boring, and then you, as a person who wants to role play and kind of immerse yourself in the character, there's nothing there to immerse in because it's a one-dimensional. There's nothing there because they just are what they are. So be careful about that too. So I mean, I'm kind of speaking out of two sides of my mouth. Yeah. Find something to hang your hat on, but don't make that your sole thing always. I don't know. I've been in a lot of games as a game master when, somebody, especially in con games, people are trying to find something. So they find this catchphrase or something annoying, and that's their whole character personality for that game is this annoying thing that they just keep bringing up because they feel like, well, I'm role-playing. I'm doing what my character would do. What, your character is just annoying? That's their whole shtick? So just be careful about being a caricature. So I'll just throw that into the mix.
That's a good point. Yeah, you don't want to just rely on the one thing and have a one-dimensional character. These are more just, just to make it for I think for GMs, it's just a quick thing, right? But for players, you definitely want to have, your backstory, and you want to have, you want to be able to change. I think change is a big thing. Your character is going to change over time.
Absolutely. Yep.
That's
so
a
any
good
other
point.
tips and tricks for you?
Yeah, that's a good point you're making, though, right? You talked about that. There's for players, there's a character arc. I mean, there's lots of sessions, and you'll change over. I guess the goal, as you're going for those dreams, is you're going to change over time and have a different feel. Where a game master is a little more, point in time. This is, what makes this person tick, and they can change over time, but it's not the same as a player.
Sorry, while Carl has a
As I have a tag.
Joking. I guess for another little tip or trick for me in some ways too, and perhaps it's a good point to clarify as well. There's a sliding scale of how we do this, yeah?
Yeah.
So, and if we were to start right back really, really early, having that goal, having a flaw or some kind of quirk to do with the character is really important. The other thing you can do, though, is you can really look at some very small details about the character. And a role-playing game is a collective story. You don't have to, it's not one person carrying the load, although it often is the games master that does carry that load. Describing things about your character is a great way to just start role-playing. It's describing an action, or it could be describing how they do a spell, or it could be describing what they have for dinner. It could be what their favourite axe looks like, their cloak, their clothing. And I find for newer role players that they love artistic work to get an inspiration about what it looks like. Describing that to the other players is really important. Describing how they might walk, describing how they might chew or fire a bow or anything like that can be a great start to do it, because ultimately, before you have to get into the personality and motivation, what you might look outwardly to the other players is also equally important. And in some ways, a good little lean in and how you might start this is, and I find this is advice I give to a lot of my newer role players, is just start using third person. I've got a character called Hagen. Hagen Harthold is a Scottish dwarf. I'm just going to put it out there. He's not actually, he's got a broad Australian accent. But Hagen's an agile dwarf. He's an old agile dwarf, basically. He's got a high dexterity. He does lots of acrobatics and lots of leaps. And so when I am in combat as a player, I will describe my actions in a very acrobatic, fast, dexterous way. I use good adjectives about speed and ferocity, and I leap from this and kick off that table and just kind of be descriptive about what my character does. And I find that it brings other characters with us. You know, you kind of, the more descriptive you can be about what you are, then the more immersive you will be. And in a lot of ways, that's an early, easy start. You know, I take the visor off my helmet and show my big red bushy beard, which I stroke while I talk to you. It's kind of something it's easy to do and puts people into a frame and visualizes what it is that you're up to. The other great little tip that I find particularly in Dungeons and Dragons, because I guess there's a whole heap of other scenarios, and we'll talk a bit about that later, is a good, nice starting point for role playing is your 6-second combat round in your turn, because invariably a role playing game, when you get into the nitty gritty of it, when you get into a fight, you each take a turn and you say what your action's going to be, and I move my 30 feet and then I hit them with my sword. Have a little 6-second communication with anyone on the battlefield at the same time, and I yell, "Get behind me," or "You'll never take me alive," or something that fills in that 6-second gap. "Get down, everyone, I'm going to use fireball." It's all it takes just to add another level of interaction within the game, as opposed to just being a player and stating what my character will do. Add that little 6-second little grab, and you'll be amazed at how different a combat feels and how much more immersive you'll find that role players when you get involved.
Because again, you're more engaged. And I think to throw off of you, James, too, and broader, and I think me and Carl are used to this from Savage Worlds, but flavor, reflavor, reflavor, reflavor. Even if you starting out, like James was saying, it's easier if you're a spellcaster, but like just try reflavoring your spells a little bit. Just reflavor them to what the theme of your character is, and then you'll see. Like even if it's very simple, right? If you're a druid, that bulk might be just a fiery ash pile or something. It doesn't have to be necessarily fire. Like just reflavoring them a little bit can also help you develop your character more. And as you were saying, James, that will naturally come out when you're describing what they're doing, because you kind of tweak that flavor just a little bit to fit your theme of your character. You'll naturally just build upon that, and you'll find yourself, developing it more and more. So I think what you were saying and reflavoring can be very strong and kind of an easy thing to start doing.
And flip that around a little bit too, because the players who are working with you then are playing that flavoring you're doing, that changing trappings, makes it more interesting for them, and then that'll bring them out of their shell. I know in the games that we've been playing recently, your character has just a weird way of casting spells, and things happen, and demon faces are doing stuff, and how that's made the other players role play with your character. It's just you're playing off each other, and it's not just one person. It's if we're all kind of doing that, I think it makes it richer for everybody. But then I think that gets people out of their shell when they see this kind of flavoring or additional kind of narrative things that you're adding in. They'll want to do that too.
Very cool. So let's talk about. It's not really a tip and trick, but we're going to talk generally about voice and accents. I mean, this is where the title is making fun of, and I think here's some tips and tricks that we can do about voice and accents here. Because I personally think, having a different voice or a different accent for a character really tremendously helps, making that character feel distinct. And for me, I'm always looking to do that with the character. Now, when I say accent, it doesn't always have to be a real-world accent, right? And this is my point of the title, is, there is no Scotland, there is no France, right? If I'm not the best at accents, but I still will do one. And it doesn't matter because it's a fantasy race. And unless you're in a modern game, right, where it's somebody from France, then then you're doing that. But for fantasy and for, whatever, some science fiction, right, aliens and stuff, these countries don't exist. They have their own accent. So whatever accent you do can be the accent of that thing. So one of the things here, it's not really a tip, but just don't be afraid to do an accent, because, your accent probably, there's no one saying that it's not the accent of the thing. Now, here is an actual tip. Again, I'm not that good at accents, but here's an actual tip from people who do accents in improv, is that when you want to do an accent for a certain country or a certain whatever, always start big. Always, like James, when you were starting doing the French thing and you were going like baguette, or like just going the most big that you can do of like whatever the kind of like tropey, over the top, oh, I'm a big Texan, whatever it is that you can think of, or somebody that you know for a movie, you always start big, and then you bring it down. So the starting big is a kind of it's a center point, or it's a kind of that brings you to where the accent is, and this is what they teach you in acting school, and then you kind of shrink it down back. So that's just a little trick for accents. I'm still not very good at accents, but that's kind of what they teach you. So let's keep talking about accents.
Accents are tricky. Accents are hard, and look, and you're going to feel like a goose. There's no question. You put yourself out there, and if you're on the first of the table to have a go at it, then you feel like an idiot when you first do it. But it makes a huge difference. As a games master, I use a lot of accents, and I'm going to argue a little bit about this. I do play Call of Cthulhu, where you are spanning the world, and so you do end up having whole chapters where you're doing other accents, and it's a fine line, because let's face it, poorly delivered accents can be pretty offensive in a lot of ways, particularly if you're dealing with real world kind of caricatures of Mickey Rooney on Breakfast at Tiffany's kind of vibe. Like, you've got to be very careful about some of those tropes, and be a little bit tricky. But one of the tips that I have for my fantasy role playing games is the direct opposite of what Eric's saying. Is I have my rules about different lineages and their accents, and it just works for me. No matter what game I play in Dungeons and Dragons, all my halflings are German, all my dwarves are Scottish, all my demons are Australian, all my goblins are French, and it just works. It just means I don't have to think, and I can just play it, and it just works really, really well. I have two rules, though, and this is an Australian-based rule. The first one is Australians should never do US accents, and US people should never do Australian accents. And once we've got that sorted out, then we're nice and easy. So for me, it's about world creation. There's a guy called, there's a group called Lunch Break Heroes, and you should check out some of their work. They're really, really, really good. They come up with a fantastic process for the game Curse of Strahd. Curse of Strahd, for those that don't know, is a very classic Dungeons and Dragons horror game. It is set in Barovia. It's got all the Dracula-like Romanian tropes that you know and love. And one of the things that they did was there are a number of different cities within Barovia, and a great tip that they've given is give each of the cities a different accent. So one city's German, one city's Russian, and the other city's Cockney English. And it means that over the course of their campaign, you can meet someone out of place and not in their city, and the players immediately pick up where they're from because of the accent that you do. And so you can weave these accents beautifully into the world you create if you do it consistently. And the more you do it, the better you get.
James, let me respond to something you said, because you kind of directly said you're saying the opposite of me, but I don't think you are. My main point was, don't be afraid to do accents because you're not good at them. I mean, like, in your point, if all of the halflings are French, right, you might not have the best French accent. Okay, whatever, German. You might not have the best German accent, but they all have that accent. And if somebody's like, well, that actually isn't what a German accent exactly sounds like, but they're not German, right? They're halfling. That was my only point, was that
is true.
You shouldn't be afraid to try it, even if you're not great, because, as long as you're, like you said, consistent, and I think that's a really good point. That's a really good tip for GMs, is keeping it with each race, and that's easy to kind of go to. Don't be afraid to try it, because there is no Germany in, Faerun, I guess, was my point. Carl, sorry, you were about to say something.
I think I'll be the first to admit I don't do a lot of accents in the sense of I'm trying to sound like I'm French or German. But what I do think is important that I do is I speak with different styles or tempo or vocal mannerisms. So I think in my games, it's pretty clear when somebody's is a very thoughtful person or is really measuring their words, and that's part of how they speak. And even though they really, I could do more accents, and I don't. I use that as a way of demonstrating something about the character and how they interact with the world. Now, I do have a thing that's interesting. I know you guys were talking about improv and some of those things. I did run across once, and this was from another kind of gaming group, that they talked about if you wanted to get in the head of something, pick an animal. Actually, pick an animal and think about how would that animal talk, right? It's like, what would that animal sound like?
Interesting. Yeah.
And it's no longer an accent. Now it's, the maybe that classic trope, the snake that's kind of speaks like this, it's not a real accent. It's nothing, but it represents something different. And it doesn't mean you're talking like you are a snake and therefore you're talking like a snake, but it gives you that ability to kind of pick something that's outside of the human world and, kind of see what might that sound like? And then that can drive an accent that's not potentially Americans doing Australian accents, which, hi, I'm Australian, give me Fosters. That's all I can do. I don't do anything better than that. That's the best thing I can do.
Put it on the Bobby.
I'm American, give me a bud.
You come up with a great point too, and there's really good examples of all this stuff right out there. All you need to do is look at Disney animation in a lot of ways.
Yes.
If you look at the Jungle Book, it will give you 10 different characterizations with different voices based on animal, but they're all great. If you look at The Lion King, for example, there's a dozen different voice types based on different characterizations that you could pick up that has nothing to do with a nationality at all, that just comes in with a motivation and has a deep and different sounding voice.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. That's a really, really good tip, Carl. I really like that a lot. And that's something to talk about, is that we're not always talking about accents, voices, right? Voices are not necessarily accents, and they can be very different. And they can also really, really help you make distinct characters and help you get into your character. And some of the more, I think, tips there, like you said, that was about picking an animal. That's a really good idea. Being a little bit aware of where you're talking from. So one of the things that might teach you is, if you're talking from deep in the stomach, even talking like this, or if you're talking up in more of the nasal cavities, you can talk more like this, or talking more on the cheek. So thinking about where your sound is coming from can change a lot. Also, one thing that a lot of voice actors will do is, even though nobody can see them, they'll gesticulate and make a lot of weird faces. So, if you're just talking like this and you snarl your lip to the side, right away I have a different voice. That's totally different. I didn't have to do much, right, to do that voice. I just sneered my lips out to the side, and it just forced my sound to be different. And then you have an interesting character, right? So there's a couple tips you can do. And then Carl, like you brought up, even just controlling your tempo. I mean, somebody who talks really, really slow, and talks like this can have a totally different feel than somebody who's really manic and talking really quickly like this. So just controlling your tempo also can be a really good way to kind of diversify characters.
I think it's almost like you just did a clinic there.
Very quickly.
Yeah. Went through a number of items right there. And they're very nice. Very cool. Very cool. So
the trick too is, and this is the hard thing when you're a games master, is remembering the damn accent you did last week too.
Oh, God,
so you've got to. And I struggle with this all the time. You have to kind of make a little note and try and kind of work it through. And I find that making a big change in your voice, reserve it for maybe 2 or 3 of your major antagonists and your major characters, because it'll be impossible to remember them each time unless you're a ridiculous voice actor, which I'm not. But if you can create a distinctive voice for your main antagonist, a major ally and a quirky kind of person that you might meet along the way, really, really important. The other little tip too, which is I guess something that's been relatively new with virtual tabletops and really role-playing over Discord or over Zoom, is you have a microphone now, so you get to talk deeply into a microphone, or you get to be a bit further away. So you actually get to use some of the tools that you're using to communicate in different ways. There's voice modulation programs you can get. You can add to your voice if you're that way inclined. If you're really scared of doing this stuff, there are ways that the tech can actually help you. So
hey James, have you ever tried the voice changers or anything in your games?
Yeah.
How did that turn out? So
I used it for oral last year, so I ran Rime of the Frost Maiden for a number of times, and I wanted my Frost Maiden, the goddess of frost and snow, to be very, very different. And so for my kids' games, I used a voice modulation program to create her voice. Did it very, very sparingly. And it freaked the kids right out, like it was a horrible thing, you know. And so they're meeting a massive antagonist that's ready to kill them anyway. They're all pumped up because they know that it's like the big boss. And then when I click a voice mod, and then there's this kind of ethereal, strange, you know, kind of voice that's wafting over, and they lost their minds. Use it sparingly, but it was really, really cool.
Yeah, that would be very helpful for a GM, I can imagine. And then you don't have to remember the accent, right? You just have to rember what
preset. What preset?
Yeah.
That was number 2. We're good. We're ready to go.
Cool. I think one thing we should talk about now is also just, you know, all these things we're talking about. A lot of this is just overcoming your fear a little bit and being that vulnerability, right? Because once you kind of just commit, you'll see that unless other players are a-holes, then you shouldn't be in the game anyways. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you're, you know, having the space to be silly and having that be okay, like that'll be, and then like Carl, you said, other players will respond to that, and then they'll be silly or they'll kind of react. So you just kind of will reach a point as you're starting to do this, really feel like, you know, it's okay to put myself out there. It's okay to kind of commit, because when you do commit, that's when you get it will just come more easily. You know, if you're kind of afraid to do it and holding back more, you might struggle a little bit more. So just kind of being like, you know, saying to yourself, I'm just going to go for it. And just going for it. Because that's what people have to do, right? Actors have to do that. They just have to go for it. You can't hold back. So,
and having a good chat with your other players and your games master is really important. I had a player, again, old school gamer, old school World of Warcraft player, hadn't done a lot of role-playing before, decided this year, didn't last year, but this year said, you know what, I want to have a go at this. I want to really role play. I'm playing a bard this time instead of a ranger, so I really want to have that personality, and I'm gonna give an accent a go. And so he kind of let the group know and let me know, saying, is that okay? And of course we're like, yeah, sure, you know, have a go at it. And he did the whole lock, stock, two smoking barrel kind of, you know, in a London kind of, well, as you go, that kind of vibe out of it. And as a games master, you've got to jump in with them. You know what I mean? Like, don't let them hang. If a player's kind of saying, hey, I want to give this a go, help them out a bit. If you're another player and you know that someone's giving it a good hard college try, go in with them. You'll find it's far more fun. Even if the accent is silly and everyone laughs, and it doesn't matter. It's you've gone to another level, and it's just fun.
And some of the most fun I've had as a game master is watching in character folks just go back and forth. It's like nothing important is going on other than they're going and in character with the right voices and the, you know, just role playing back and forth with each other, voices, mannerisms, you know, goals, objectives, you know, all kind of rolling into just a conversation. I mean, it's a role playing game. It doesn't have to be a combat game. It doesn't have to be move on to the next scene as fast as you can. It's role playing, so that's I have a lot of fun. Plus, I get to take a break.
As a GM, yeah. And that's both of you guys are touching, I think, a lot on this. And that's another thing. It is that, you know, even if you're a little hesitant for role playing, you know, ask the other player, the other character, in character, right? Ask them questions about themselves, or see like, oh, what does that look like, or what it like, bounce off them, because that'll actually help you. And a big thing, you know, we hear yes and. Right?
Yep.
Thrown around, it's kind of silly. But that does help. Like, it can definitely help. I mean, if somebody says something, you know, you maybe go along with it. Maybe have your character's hesitant about it, but, like, go along with it. If that person's running the kind of scene, you know, go along with it, and you'll kind of naturally, again, your character will come out because you'll be kind of playing off that other person. So use your other players. I mean, that's a good tip right there. Just use the other players, because they're also kind of a role-playing resource, right? And that's what I think we've all been talking about. A little, it's somewhat related to what you're saying there is, as a game master, you have to allow for players sometimes just to make stuff up, right? Because in character, you're asking, like you're saying, hey, Jim, do you see that track? Where's that track going? And if that player says, well, I know what I'm doing,
and that track is going west, and you're the game master going, no, it's really not going west, but it's going west now because you guys are demonstrating. I should be an expert in tracking.
You don't want to stop it. Yeah.
So keep it going. Have them do that conversation instead of go, no, that's wrong. Your character would not know that. Let them do it. Let them play it out.
Absolutely.
It's my job to figure it out.
Yeah.
So don't worry about it.
I think the beauty of this game is the collaboration. It's the collaborative storytelling, and as a games master, giving people space to explore the stories that they want to explore is really important. The campfire scene that has become a really big part of a lot of role playing games, I think, is one of the best techniques you can use as a games master, letting players sit around with no real imminent threat that allow them to reflect on the story that's gone in the past and reflect on each other's background and motivation, and just a bit of a check in how you doing kind of thing is really great. And that's system agnostic. I talk about campfire, but I use it in Call of Cthulhu all the time, where players get to reflect on what it is that they've done. One of the most beautiful scenes I've seen in a very long time was in a Call of Cthulhu game called The Two-Headed Serpent, where many people have died, and they're sitting in a bar in downtown Shanghai about to hop on a plane to fly to stop the imminent portal to the other realm that's being opened. And the players and characters in character spend about an hour just chatting about where they've been and where they're going, and the impacts that it had, the shell shock nature of what they've been up to. It was just beautiful to watch. And as a player, as a storyteller, as a games master, you've got to give them space to be able to do it.
Very good, very good. Cool. And I think a couple more things before we wrap up. I think one thing to quickly touch on, at least I see, is backstory for players. You don't have to write a huge backstory. Even if you write a very short backstory, always put in hooks. Always put in one or two narrative hooks. Put in something that you had an enemy with somebody, or you had something that grounds you to the world, something that the GM can then use to bring in to then play off for you. Because that'll also really help you get invested. It'll help the GM kind of bring stuff tailored to you that can help your character progression along, that can really challenge you. So I think even if you don't like to write long backstories, just make one or two kind of concise hooks that the GM can use. And that can be an enemy, that can be a lost love, that can be a treasure that you're searching for. I mean, there's a lot of them, right? There's a lot of resources out there, but I think that's a really good way.
Don't do that trope where I'm an orphan and I know nobody and I hate everybody, and so therefore there's nobody you can play against me, Mr. Game Master. Don't do that. Don't do that.
No.
What did I say? I think I ran a game with you, Eric, when I said no orphans, and then everyone gave me freaking orphans. What are you doing? One last tip from me too is, in some ways too, don't forget that your skills and abilities and attributes for your character can also guide some of your role-playing decisions. There's always the difficulty of how do you play a low charisma character. And all of the role-playing games, I don't know of any one that doesn't have social skills embedded into the game. So that might be fast talk or persuasion or charm or intimidation or whatever you might have. So have a bit of a think about how those things might interact and how that might drive the way that you interact with other people. An intimidating, low charisma character is very, very different to a high charm, high appearance character, and just kind of getting a sense of how you might interact with the world based on that and letting that guide you is also a great little pointer when you're starting to emerge as a new role player.
Yeah, that's a good thing to bring up too, is that when we're talking about role playing, it might seem like, a lot of the time it's the charisma people that are being able to talk, but having low charisma, talk. Like interact, insert yourself. I mean, my character in your game, James, is a very, very low charisma kobold who often finds himself in these situations and talking or, adding his own twist on things. So I think that, just because you're maybe not good at charming somebody doesn't mean that he will often use his intelligence to then go on like a kind of a monologue or to say something to somebody else, right? That's the angle he comes from. He's not good at convincing people to do things, but he still can talk, he can still role play, he can still do all the things. So don't let that be a barrier to you based on the mechanics, right? Every single character should have their kind of moment to shine, have their talking, unless they're mute, I guess. But you can still emote in other ways.
Oh,
I mean,
God, reminds me. I had a player once play a
yeah.
mute halfling that could only communicate through gum leaf whistling. It's like,
oh man,
why
That's
would you
rough.
do that to me?
yeah, I was in a game with a player who chose not to speak, and it was really difficult. Yeah, but you could do it well, but it would be hard. It would be hard, but yeah.
I guess that's the 300 level class that on role playing.
That's right.
Any other tips and tricks from you guys that you can think of?
I feel like we nailed it. You nailed it, man. You nailed it.
We nailed it.
Did I mention that all halflings are German? I just feel like I need to go back there. All
I
dwarves
know,
are
that
Scottish.
is-
So in
That's
conclusion,
only you.
we have determined all dwarves are indeed Scottish. So with all
are.
this, we
No.
have concluded.
No. Again, I think the final takeaway. Reiterate this again. Don't be afraid to put yourself out there, no matter what. And just trying one or two of these things, just moving that inch. I think you'll see the dividends come back from that, and it'll become easier and easier. It's like anything else. And even if you think like, well, I'm not that kind of person. I'm not an outgoing person. I'm not very, I don't know acting and all that stuff. It doesn't just doing a couple of those little things. You will get better at it. You will find yourself more invested, and it will progress over time. So as long as you're willing to try it, put yourself out there, do a couple of these things, I think you'll see the benefits, right, guys? I mean,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that puts a
Absolutely.
great point on it. And so I'm going to go ahead and say thanks, everyone, for tuning in. We love to get some questions, comments, input.
Please.
Just send us a note to gamemaster@masteringtherpg.com. Both of those are one word. Eric, you got something you want to add on?
Again, if we can get, we would love to also arbitrate any issues you guys have. So if you have questions about any kind of system, this is system agnostic arbitration, we would love to judge things because we're
And there's
we
three
have
of
our
us.
So
opinions.
judgmental.
And there's
Yeah,
three
we're
of us, so
judgmental
we'll come up with some
Yeah.
decision because there can't be a tie. So there
That's
you go.
true.
It
There
works.
cannot be a tie. So yeah, we'll be your arbiters, your grand arbiters of all things, if you need that function. So I just want to throw that out there.
And remember, that's GameMaster@masteringtherpg.com. So anyway, this is the crew. We're wishing you some great games, and hopefully your dice roll your way, and that you can role play it out when they don't. Have a good night.